Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. And today I'm actually joined with a very special guest, and this is a very relevant guest given what has happened in the last 24 hours. I am joined by Stan Kephart. You may have seen him on national or local news, and he is one of the nation's foremost experts on riot control and physical security. And Stan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Nicholas, for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, all right. Now, with that, I think before we dive in, I would love my audience to hear some of your resume, because like when I read it, I'm like, I have to talk to this guy. You know, it's very impressive. And so if you could just relay my audience some of your credentials.
Well, my resume proves that I am old. I am 80 years of age. I had almost 1 month shy of 40 years in law enforcement service. Ranging from a street officer in Kansas City, Missouri, and San Jose, California, then on to a director of a police academy, and then on security administrator for the 1984 Olympic Games in Los Angeles, and then the undersheriff for a small county in Northern California, and then a tribal police commander in Indio, California, and subsequently a chief of police for the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community here in the Phoenix metropolitan area, the second largest tribal police department in the country. And I retired from there in 2011. So it's been quite an odyssey.
Yeah, no kidding, no kidding. And I think it's interesting, just given your background, obviously doing security for the 1984 Olympics, you know a little thing or two about crowd control, I would have to imagine.
That's why I was hired. I had the, depending on a blessing or a curse, I was the public safety director for the US Festival, which was the largest rock concert of its kind in the history of American music, then held in Glen Helen Regional Park. We had 3 days of music. We attracted over 500,000 people at that time. In the event. Had some headliners from, we had a country day, a rock day, a hard rock day, and we had all the main people in Bill Graham Presents. And so that was quite an odyssey. We wound up with having 43 arrests, 1 newborn baby, several cases of coccidiomycosis because we didn't know we were in a cattle land and there were spores there. But there were no major incidents, no deaths attributed to that large crowd. And it worked very well. The planning worked very well.
That's great. That's great. And unfortunately, we have to pivot to the unfortunate events of yesterday. Now, obviously, I think the vast majority of Americans and the rest of the world watched in horror as we saw our nation's capital breached for the first time since the War of 1812. You know, not even Vietnam. It was absolutely surreal to watch. You know, as we're following along with this. But just being in cybersecurity, you know, the first thing that I was thinking of as I'm looking at, you know, the Capitol Police and then eventually the Metro Police getting overwhelmed by just this swell of rioters and everything else was the physical security. And obviously cybersecurity dovetails with physical security very well, but I'm not a physical security expert, which is why I, you know, wanted to find an expert like yourself to actually start talking about this kind of stuff. And I want to know, like, it seemed like everything seemed to go wrong, you know, yesterday, but I wanted to start with, you know, your expert opinion on just looking at the footage, what you viewed yesterday and everything that you saw as well, because I know you were following along too. What went right for the Capitol Police or the Metro Police? Let's start there. I think that'll be a quicker answer.
Candidly, I can't think of anything that went right. I was shocked and horrified, like most Americans, not only the action, behavior, and conduct of the people that committed these crimes, but I was equally shocked at the lack of preparation and the response of law enforcement. And it pains me to have to say that about my brothers and sisters in law enforcement.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think it was evident that they seem to be undermanned. But you know, you're the expert, and so if nothing went right, what are the big things then that you think went wrong above and beyond what you just said?
Well, there were 2 things that jump out at you immediately by the behavior pattern of the reaction of the police. Told us in very, very distinct terms that they were not prepared for this. There was no planning that seemed to be in place as to how they were to react. Now, here's what's troubling about that. The Washington, D.C. Police Department and all of the police agencies are members of what are called fusion centers. And fusion centers are locations where they get intelligence information ongoing about the groups such as Antifa and Black Lives Matter, other groups, depending on your political stripe. It doesn't make any difference. There are crazies on both sides of the political spectrum that law enforcement is concerned with. You have equal numbers of violent people on both sides of that equation. And so they have intelligence and they monitor this ongoing. They must have known, or if they should have known, that this was about to occur. When the crowd started forming and coming towards their location, this commanded the police command component to be prepared and to roll out the mobile command post and to set up a perimeter around the Capitol building and to start a control of this crowd. That planning has to be in place. If you have a disaster plan, and Washington, D.C. does, if there's an air crash, or if there's something that occurs that is untoward, they will have a plan by which they will invoke what's called an incident command system. And it's NIMS. And every police officer in the United States is certified in incident command systems. They are, by law, they have to be. And they are. So they know, it's not that they don't know how to do this. They do. They've been taught and trained how to do it. You set up a command post, you set up a perimeter, and you have to have the requisite training that goes with this. And here's what's troubling, Nick. And this is why I'm afraid that this may happen again and we'll get the same type of reaction. Police officers are line officers and they are specialists. They're divided into two groups. Traffic control specialists, you have people that are accident specialists. They do a major accident. They will respond and use their calculations to determine who was at fault in the accident, especially with a vehicular homicide. The same is true with riot control. Back in the student protest era, you had law enforcement officers were trained not only in the basic peace officer academy, but in advanced training, and departments formulated what were called tactical operations teams. That gave way to what we call SWAT teams and those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. With the evaporation of the student protest era, by the way, I was in such a team, the second largest team in the state of California, which was the San Jose TAC Squad, exceeded only in numbers by the San Francisco TAC Squad. These TAC squads ours was 169 individuals. I was the pepper fogger operator. I could describe what that piece of equipment is. We were specifically trained and we were specifically equipped to go into large crowds and move the crowds, disperse the crowds, or make arrests for those that stayed behind. Example, Telegraph Hill. We were deployed at Cal Berkeley during the student protest era. We marched up Telegraph Avenue with San Francisco TAC. We threw out a lot of CNN gas and smoke. Those who did not disperse and run were taken through the front of a tactical wedge formation and zip tied and then taken to the sheriff's bus and put on the bus, and they went to custody. That process didn't yield any injuries for us. We had no injuries that occurred to us in that first engagement. And it subsequently became violent. There was a death attributed in Cal Berkeley. Mr. Richter was shot and killed by the Alameda County Sheriff's Department for allegedly throwing rebar wire down on police officers from a rooftop. My point is this: these kinds of operations must have the requisite training, both at the line level. You can't just take a line officer off a beat and put him or her in a position of extreme jeopardy with the crowd and not expect that you will have a failure. Moreover, you can't have a commander who's never been trained as to how to deploy or what to do with these people, whether to withdraw them, whether to have them advance or whatever, and expect that the outcome is going to be satisfactory. This is true not only of law enforcement, but also the National Guard. I have surveyed the National Guard component of the state of Arizona, and I have sent you a proposal that we sent to the state adjutant general for Arizona. We never heard from him or the governor about what we propose to do. By the way, we propose to do it at no charge, to equip and train them properly to be able to deal with this. The National Guard has no training, and I've confirmed this through the National Guard. They have no training in riot control in the state of Arizona nor in California. They used to have training. I was a member who presented that training in California under the direction of the state adjutant general, and I have copies of that training and what we provided. And so the point I'm making is no training, the results are predictable. That's what we saw here. No training and no command and control.
And just out of curiosity, to dovetail with that point, do you think that is why, just as we were watching this unfold, rather, that there were very little arrests? As you mentioned before, essentially what you're doing is you're attempting to control the crowd, push the crowd back through tear gas or other means. Those that don't disperse, as you said, get detained essentially. We didn't really see much of that. It seemed like obviously the Capitol was breached. I had heard that there were 4 separate perimeters that they got through to get into the Capitol at one point. But what we didn't really see were arrests being made. Now, was that because of the population of police versus rioters? Was that the lack of tear gas? Like what was that?
Well, that's a great point, Nick. And here's the situation. If in the case, it'll go back to Telegraph Hill and the People's Park, 169 member unit from the San Jose Tax Squad cleared approximately 3,000 student protesters who were throwing rocks and bottles and all these kinds of things. They were violent. And if we could do that with 169 people, because we were trained and we were properly equipped and we were commanded correctly, I gotta believe that it could have been done with the requisite number of people had they been properly trained and were they properly equipped and properly commanded.
Gotcha. Now, I think that also just continues the point of, I think as you mentioned before, we're gearing up for probably another incident. And I'm believing, and as I think a lot of people are, that the next major target for a riot like this is going to be the actual inauguration day on January 20th. Now, what's going to happen is you're going to have the DC Mall full of tens of thousands of people that are well-wishing the new president. You're probably going to have, let's say, 10% of that be people like this that want to disrupt it, break it. We saw them climbing over the actual scaffolding and infrastructure that was built for Inauguration Day and everything else. If we are projecting forward into this and you, let's say, are now taking control of the DC police, or you're commanding the forces that are going to secure an election where you have an absolute ton of, let's say, peaceful people there to celebrate, but you've got, let's say, 10,000 people there that are there to do exactly what we just saw or worse, how would you, as an expert, handle that situation? How would you deploy? What would your tactics be?
I need to give a little background as to what we've created here that has caused us to have a higher challenge, a standard. We, in the protests that have occurred prior to this riot, there were well-thinking people that meant well, who gave orders to stand down. And the theory was that property can be replaced, but lives can't. And we don't want the police to take a hard line against these people and either have them disperse or be arrested, as we did in Berkeley and other locations. And so I understand that, but it didn't work. And what it did was an unintended consequence. It emboldened the protesters who turned into rioters, and the rioters won't stop. Now, these are criminals. There's a distinct difference between a protester and a rioter. One is a peaceful, constitutionally guaranteed, wonderful exercise that I support, and I'm sure you support, and everyone supports.
Yes.
That you have the right to redress government concerns that you have as a protester. And I defended as a police officer those protesters. That's part of what a cop does in a large protest. I stood in line. People don't attack them, don't do anything, even if you disagree with them. You will obey the law. We're here to enforce the law and protect their right to do this. But the other group, or sometimes they're one and the same, they turn into a criminal when they start committing criminal acts like breaking and entering and doing the malicious mischief, firebombing, and those types of attacking the police. Now you're a criminal. You stepped over the line. You need to be arrested. No arrest, no consequence. It's a continuum of what happened. That's what we're seeing now. Now, previously we saw it, and again, politics has nothing to do with policing, shouldn't have anything to do with policing. We saw it on the left side of the equation. Now we're seeing it on the right. Let's acknowledge right now, here and now, that both sides of this equation have people who are criminals, who are intent on doing violence to gain their end objective. They don't care what they have to do. If they have to kill, if they have to do these kinds of terrible things, they're going to do it. And I don't think that's going to change overnight. I don't think it's going to stop. What has to be done with that is we have to shift this paradigm and go to you either disperse or you're going to be arrested. And that's a certainty. And this will then quell those kinds of circumstances. At least it will control them and minimize the impact of what we had happen yesterday. We had 4 lives lost yesterday. 1 life was a shooting victim shot by police. The other 3 were related to the incident medical circumstances. Doesn't make any difference. It was a horrifically embarrassing moment for not only this country, but for law enforcement as well. Were I in charge of this and I had a wish list, I would have the requisite number of people who are trained and specifically equipped with riot control technology, which we have available today. You can go to the California National Guard or the Arizona National Guard and ask them if they have a pepper fogger. And in both instances, they will say, "What's that?" They don't know what it is. You can go online and look up what a pepper fogger is. And it's a device that weighs approximately 42 pounds. It has 1 quart of CNN gas, 1 quart of smoke. And if you fire that engine up and start spewing that smoke and gas out through the front of a wedge, if you open the front of the wedge and start spewing that out, it's going to go into the large crowd and they're not going to be able to see because of the smoke. They don't know what's coming towards them. The wedge is advancing and they're going to get the tear gas all over them. And we've got gas masks on. As we go forward, those people who are sitting there or don't disperse, we're going to pull them through the wedge, take them back to secondary personnel who are going to strip cuff them and take them away to the bus and to custody. That same tactic should have been available to the commanders of this circumstance to use on the people who scaled the wall and came onto the property and were committing a crime. It wasn't available. Instead, what they did was the same thing that we've seen in the case of Phoenix and other major cities. They threw flashbangs. Flashbangs are a device that are supposed to disorient people. They're used for breaching an entry into a house, something like that. But when they're used out in the open, it makes a large noise. But the rioters conclude nothing happens behind that loud noise. And so they're immune to it. They don't run from it. It's a big bang and that's it. That's why it's called a flashbang. In addition, they're throwing gas grenades at the crowd. The crowd is then picking up the gas grenades because they're what are called dispersion grenades, not blast grenades. And they're throwing the grenades back at the police. We saw this happen in the riots here in Phoenix. We've seen it happen all over the country in Portland and Seattle, etc. And so then they have the mace to be able to use, and that is rather ineffective. So what I'm saying is improper equipment, improper training, and improper command and control. I would have addressed those issues. I would have had the requisite number of people there. It's not a question of being outnumbered. Police are very rarely and would not have equal numbers, and that's not the point. As I demonstrated earlier, we were able to be effective in a presidential circumstance. I'll give you the incident. When Richard Nixon visited San Jose, we had a lead Secret Service team that came in and told us what they were prepared to do, how they protected the president's life. We deployed the San Jose TAC squad. When Richard Nixon came out of the stadium, there were 4,000 San Jose State students about to riot, screaming. He jumped up on a car and started giving them the victory sign, and that infuriated them. Had it not been for the San Jose Tactical Squad, we wouldn't have gotten him out of that parking lot, and that's a fact. The Secret Service had attaché cases with submachine guns in them, and they were opening the attaché cases as the crowd closed in. San Jose TAC, 169 members. We moved those people out. We got his car out of the parking lot and back to the airport safe. So that's an example. What you're going to see in Washington, D.C. with the inauguration. The Secret Service, the FBI, and the federal agencies will do a very good job of intelligence and sanitizing the area, both pre-event and while the event is going on, looking for things such as snipers and those kinds of things. And they will do an excellent job of that. I'm confident of that. I know these people. I work with them now. I have some of them retired who are with my company. They will do an excellent job in that regard, but that's not the point. The point is the FBI doesn't use batons, they don't use gas grenades, they don't use flashbangs, and neither does the Secret Service. Municipal police, county sheriff's departments, and the National Guard have these pieces of equipment which are outdated and won't serve their interests. That is the problem and the concern I have for what is about to occur.
So in that sense, if we're looking at, let's say, a crowd of 100,000 people for a presidential inauguration in 13 days, we basically have to gear up hundreds, if not thousands, of police properly, with the right gear, and then train them? Or do we have the ability, just given the vast infrastructure of the United States, to start bringing in, let's say, those tactical teams, those SWAT teams, and have them coordinate on the ground? Or is that not needed? Because my fear would be that 10 to 20,000 people show up and they are messing with the other 80,000, the other 100,000, or they're overrunning. No matter how many people you have, if 10,000 people are charging at you, there's got to be a way that you can disperse it or control it. Or are we just looking at a potential disaster in less than 2 weeks?
If we do nothing, I will say that there is the rich potential for a catastrophe, in my professional opinion. I would say it's almost a certainty if we do nothing. If we stand in this zone and don't go forward and do and deliver proper training, and proper command and control and proper equipping of our people, then we are running headlong into a very catastrophic event. If we do training, there is still time where properly organized integrated group training could produce the requisite number of people who are using tactics that are simple but very direct and very effective, are time honored, and we properly equip specialists to use gas munitions and the proper way with the proper delivery vehicle, a pepper fogger. It is possible that we could mitigate this circumstance somewhere in the area of 75 to 78% by my calculations.
Wow.
I have gotten specific as to how this could be done, and I sent this to you. I made a proposal to the Adjutant General of the state of Arizona, which, as I said earlier, was ignored, as to how I could do this and how I would be prepared to do it, and advise others as to how the command and control section, how the line officers could be converted into specialists, and how that could be done from the ground up.
Wow. Well, and I mean, obviously, I think the entire world is hoping that, the police in the area are able to step up and all of that before the actual inauguration. They've got, like I said, less than 2 weeks on that. Now, with that, I actually want to pivot real quick to another topic here. Just looking at the time that we've got left, and I've mentioned this to my audience before, that cybersecurity is agnostic to politics. I will change that to security is agnostic to politics, but we're definitely not immune to it,
No.
in this case. And part of what I wanted to address, especially to get your expert opinion on a couple of different things, and I'm going to share my screen here so that my audience can see the video, and I will explain to those of you listening on the radio or podcast what we are seeing here. You may hear the audio or so, but essentially, I wanted to talk about, and you can see my video, right, Stan?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
I'm
great.
looking at it now.
Perfect. What I want to show you are two different clips. One is a 14-second clip here that is essentially going around on conspiracy theory websites and conspiracy Twitter that says this is proof that the police are actually colluding with the rioters, with these criminals, to let them in to the Capitol. And so let's take a watch. This one is 14 seconds.
Police are squabbling with protesters. Oh, there we go. And they just reached the Capitol again.
Okay. So that is, again, a 14-second clip. And for those that obviously can't see it, that are listening to me here on the air, essentially what you have are what I now know are known as French gates, those small little metal barriers, maybe half a dozen police at most. And behind that is dozens, literally just vastly outnumbering the police. One of the barriers looks like it's moved aside. I'm not necessarily sure. I've watched it 1,000 times if it is the police that do that or if it's the protesters. But then you see the police basically backing up and walking away as the protesters are coming in. And Stan, I'd like to get your expert opinion on that. Is this collusion between the rioters and the police?
I didn't see anything that would evidence collusion. That is a very strong indictment of what the police did. I can give you, for instance, if the police were talking to people who came in and they allowed them to come in because they said, look, we want to come in and tell these people to leave the area, and we will do that if you will allow us in to do it. We're monitors, and we want to come in and let's say in our heads, we're their brothers. We want to come in and tell them, look, you got to leave the area, please. We're with you, but you've got to do this. I don't know that did or did not happen, but I'm giving you an example of how they would have had permissive entry. Certainly, the police, under those circumstances, what I saw was they did allow them. Whether they opened the gate or the people that came in opened the gate is not the relevant point. There was no opposition to it, no physical opposition to it by the police, but that doesn't strike me as being evidence of collusion. I mean, how can you then wed the two together? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I think the point though is that the police offered no resistance, and so then that's the question. Why didn't they offer any resistance? Is it because of collusion? Is it because they're protecting themselves? Like what typically, how are officers trained in a situation like that?
Yeah. Officers are taught and trained. If you have a circumstance where your personal safety is at risk, there is nothing wrong with you withdrawing. There is nothing wrong with you moving back. A retreat is part of the tactical handbook, if you will, in law enforcement. Certainly, it would be prudent to do that with an overwhelming number of people, as we saw in the film clip. There were larger number of people. But again, I don't know, and I can't get in the minds of the police officers as to why they did that. I think that's sheer speculation. And for people to conclude that it was a conspiracy based on what? What evidence do you have that this was a conspiratorial act? You don't have any.
Right. And I believe the videos are what they're using. The next one I want to show you, and there's one more video I want to show you. This one's a little longer. And let me preface this here because this one is actually, and you should be able to see my screen now in a minute here. This video essentially is of an African-American officer. He's the only one, it's apparently in this area in the Capitol as protesters are moving in, and he is continuously moving back. This has been held up by conspiracy theorists, once again, as either collusion or why this whole thing is essentially psychological warfare, because it's all a hoax. Now, let's watch this.
Can you hold right there?
Yes.
For just one moment?
Sure.
I have before me, Nick, a picture of an African-American officer with his back to me,
Yes.
with his hand on his firearm, confronted by a group of people in front of him. He's got his hand on his firearm. What this is indicating is that he is prepared to use lethal force. And that is right now, under these circumstances, tells me the level of concern that he has. He believes that his personal safety is in direct jeopardy. Go ahead, go forward.
All right, let's take a watch, and like I said, I'll explain it to the audience that is listening after. Okay. Now, what we just saw, for those of you listening, just real quick, was a single African-American officer, as mentioned before, continuously backing up, hand on his firearm, as Stan mentioned, going up a couple of different flights of stairs as protesters are essentially following him up. He picks up, looks like a baton or an asp, and is trying to basically keep them back until he backs up to a point where other officers are able to arrive on the scene as he's attempting to radio them the entire time. Now, Stan, in your opinion, what do you think of the officers' tactics? Does this show any kind of psyops or collusion or anything like that? I'd like to know your opinion on what we just saw here.
It doesn't show, again, there's no evidence of collusion with what I just saw in the film clip, but there are some interesting things. He starts out with his hand on his firearm and gesturing with his free left hand for the people to stay back. The one individual with a printed T-shirt comes forward towards him as if to say, "You're not going to shoot me. I know better than that. You're going to shoot me for what? Being a trespasser? Come on, it's a misdemeanor crime. You know, I haven't done anything yet. I haven't vandalized anything. I'm just here. You can arrest me for trespassing, but you're not going to shoot me. I know that." And so he continues to go forward, and the officer backs up, and he picks up his ASP, and that is an ASP baton, ASP, Armament Systems Procedures. I've been an ASP instructor for 3 decades. He then takes the ASP baton in his hand, and he assumes a classical position of readiness, ready to use and deploy the ASP baton instead of his firearm. I don't know this, but I suspect that he put his hand on his firearm because he didn't have his ASP available. It was on the ground, and I can't understand that. But certainly that does not show collusion. It shows him now de-escalating away from his firearm to the ASP baton and backing up tactically from the crowd, who he continues to try to tell to stay back. And they continue to take the ground until the posse gets there, at which time they are confronted, and that stops them from going forward. I see no tactical wrongdoing on the part of this officer. He is outnumbered. He is not equipped initially properly, and then he equips himself with the ASP. What he did, my compliments. I think he did exactly what he's been taught and trained to do.
Gotcha. And thank you. I just, as we're going through, one of the things that I continuously track is misinformation online. Just objectively want to understand, what's going on. Are we actually seeing what we're seeing? Are we not? And so thank you for clearing that up. I think that's a good service, that you're doing there. And with that, unfortunately, we're out of time. This ran a little longer than I wanted it to, but it's just such an interesting topic. And Stan, thank you so much for joining me here. If people want to know more about you or what you're doing, is there a website or social media, LinkedIn or Twitter, anything that you'd like to tell them where they can find you?
They can contact me at Stan, S-T-A-N, and Police Practices. Stan at, the symbol at, and, A-N-D spelled out, policeandsecuritypractices.com. And I'm be happy to help in any way I can.
Great. Thank you, Stan. Thanks again. And
Right.
This has just been a fascinating half hour.
Okay,
Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you.
Good day.